Hi everybody, you're very welcome to today's Saturday session where we're going to focus on demand, supply and putting them together in the market equilibrium. This question is bound to come up somewhere on the paper. I've yet to see an economics paper where there hasn't been either a mixture of both demand and supply and the market equilibrium, or maybe just one, either demand on its own or supply on its own. But realistically, this is a topic that is going to come up. It is the topic that underpins economics and links all sections and all strands together. So it really is vital that you have a good grasp of the foundational concepts behind demand and supply, that you can draw both and graphically represent both demand and supply graphs, how they merge together to become a market equilibrium, and then looking at how either demand or supply will shift either left or right due to external factors affecting them. Okay, so today's session is going to focus on a lot of those topics. We're going to start by looking at the graphically representing our demand, supply curves and our market equilibrium curves. We're also going to look at the factors that affect both demand and supply. We'll distinguish between a movement along and a shift of both demand and supply curves. And then we're going to put all that together to practice some exam questions. So hopefully you find it useful and you get something really, really beneficial out of the session. Okay, so if we start our revision with the law of demand. So we should know at this stage that the law of demand states that if price rises, the quantity of demanded due to that price rise will fall. And vice versa, if price falls, the quantity demanded will rise. So this is represented on the demand curve, where we see that at higher prices, consumers are generally willing to purchase less than at lower prices. And so if we drew that in, and we say, look, that price 3 there, only 3 people will demand the good. If that price dropped to 2, we'll go straight across where it hits the demand curve. Now 4 people are willing to buy the good, so that's an increase of 1. If we increase the price to 4, we can see that now only 1 person is willing to buy the good. Again, a drop there. So the demand curve is said to be downward sloping. So it's said to have a negative slope. So we can see that downward sloping from left to right. So moving on from there, we have the difference between the movement along the demand curve versus the shift of the demand curve. So very important that we'll distinguish these two, as it does come up quite a lot in the exam itself. It's very simple. The movement along the demand curve is caused by the change in the price of the good itself. So sometimes we say that as the price of good X. Okay? Whereas a shift in the demand curve is caused by any non-price determinant. So demand will change, but the price of the good will stay the same. So some external factor or non-price determinant, right, is causing this to change, such as consumers' income. So if we look at that on the graph again, as we just drew on a previous slide, the movement along the curve literally will go up and down the demand curve. Okay, completely caused by a change in the price of the good itself. Whereas the shift in the demand curve here, we can see that the price does not change. The price stays the same. Okay, but something else, a non-price determinant, so such as income, etc., causes the demand curve to shift either left or right. And in this diagram here, we can see that it is shifting to the right, which shows an increase in demand. So it's vital then that we know what those factors are that can cause a shift or simply the movement. So often you'll see this written in textbooks: the demand for X is a function of the price of X. POG is the price of other goods. Y is income. T, taste or preferences. E, consumers' expectations regarding future prices. G, government regulations. And U, unplanned factors. And if we simply mark it out here, this on its own causes the movement along the demand curve, whereas all these ones will cause a shift of the demand curve. So if we look at the law of supply then, supply is the opposite to demand. So basically, as the price increases, supply increases. So as we looked at demand from the consumer's point of view on its own, we're looking at supply from the supplier's point of view. So always very, very important that we always do that. So we look at it from the supplier's point of view. Something students get confused with sometimes. But if you put yourself in a supplier's situation and you are producing a good or supplying a good, if the price of that good increased, you would do your best to supply more of those goods, so you would make more money. So that's essentially it. If you look at our example here, a firm is willing to produce more goods at €2 as opposed to €1. Why? Because obviously you're going to make more money. So if we look at the supply curve then, it is upward sloping from left to right. And again, if price P1 happens here, we can see we have Q1 demanded. If the price increases to P2, we can see now more is willing to be supplied, so the quantity supplied will increase. So a change in the selling price of the good itself will cause a movement along the supply curve. We term this a change in the quantity supplied. So again, as it was with demand, so similarly to demand, a shift in supply curve is caused by any non-price determinant of supply. And again, very, very important that we look at supply from just the supplier's point of view. Okay, so that is vital. Some students always find that tricky and the minute they hear supply, bring in demand. Don't need to worry about that. Just looking at it at the supplier's point of view until we actually put them both together. So shift in the supply curve illustrates different quantities supplied at the same price. Again, same as demand, can shift left or can shift right, depending on obviously if it's an increase or decrease in supply. So as we had with demand, you're going to have two curves. Again, price is not changing here, so it's a non-price determinant. That is going to cause supply to shift to the right if it's an increase in supply, and then to the left if it's a decrease. Okay. So as we said, it's a change in any of the factors other than price. So any non-price determinant. Okay, very same idea as we already had with demand. Okay, so any non-price determinant. So this is really a vital slide for you to know and for you to remember. Obviously not just for supply, but when you're looking at the market equilibrium and looking at putting both demand and supply together, your price of the good always going to cause that movement along it. So any change in the price of the good, whether it's demand or supply, will always cause a movement along the curve, whereas your shift then will be the price of other related goods, cost of production, quite an easy one, factors outside the control of the firm, state of technology, taxation and subsidies, objectives of the firm, and the number of firms in the industry. So these are all related to supply. Again, vitally know really for the equilibrium section. Right, when you put demand and supply together, that market equilibrium point, whether it is supply that's going to shift or whether it's demand that's going to shift. So you really need to know these in detail, because you'll be given a scenario in a question and you'll have to decide, number one, is it actually supply or demand that's been affected, and then that effect will it cause it to shift either left or right, obviously resulting in a new equilibrium position at that point. So there are some of the questions we're going to practice later on. So now we put the both of them together. So where demand and supply meet, you get your equilibrium. Okay, so price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. Again, symbolizing this diagram by a little P star and a Q star. Alright, so it's very, very simple. It's the point where they both meet and there's no tendency for price to change. Okay, and that's a common thing that's left out by students. Okay, in your definition, they often say it's where supply and demand meet, but they always forget to say there's no tendency for price to change. So what does that actually mean? Okay, no tendency for price to change means that pretty much everyone is satisfied. Okay, the number of goods demanded equals the number of goods being supplied. Alright, so everybody's happy, both suppliers and consumers. Okay, and obviously that doesn't always happen in real life, hence the questions you're going to get. Okay, so if I just show you how to draw that very, very quickly. Again, obviously you guys will have rulers. It'll look a little bit better hopefully in my freehand sketch. Cannot stress enough how many students leave out P and Q out of your diagrams, out of your graphs, or out of your curves. Please make sure you straight away, the minute you draw your two axes, automatically label them P and Q. Okay, so always downward sloping demand curve, okay, and upward sloping supply curve. Label those D and S. Okay, don't get them confused, happens quite a lot as well. Something to be aware of, lose marks straight away, half marks if you get your supply and demand curve confused. Alright, and then generally worth putting in a new colour, equilibrium. Okay, from where equilibrium is, then go straight across. I like to do dotted lines, again that's up to you, and call it, I also like to use PE, price equilibrium, and go straight down, dotted lines again, and QE, quantity equilibrium. And that's a very, very simple version of how you do it. So we know equilibrium occurs where demand and supply meet. What happens above or below that point, I suppose, and that seems to be kind of a question you're asked. They'll give you a scenario and you kind of have to say, how do we get back to equilibrium? So if the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied, scarcity would exist, which increase price. Again, if we look at a topical scenario of that, we've got housing at the minute. Okay, too few people chasing, or too many people chasing too few goods. Right, so eventually consumers won't be able to afford the price. Think about what happened in our previous recession. People couldn't afford the prices anymore, so demand will decrease. Eventually it will get back to equilibrium. Alright, and if it's the other side, if the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded, right, people aren't demanding the goods as much, so the suppliers aren't going to be able to sell their goods at that price, so they must lower their price to get rid of their surplus stock. So what happens is, in both situations, they will eventually cause equilibrium to occur again. So you often hear about the market, okay, kind of correcting itself. And it will always happen to a certain extent. Right, but obviously it can take a long time for that to happen, and you can, be spending a lot of money in that situation in that kind of, I suppose, space where that does happen. So this question was from 2021, question 13. Again, topical at the time. The shortage of PlayStation 5 gaming consoles was a nightmare for many consumers in the lead up to Christmas 2020. Complete the diagram below to indicate how excess demand, so that is occurring in this market. And again, something very important. Actually, change colour, change that to red. Excess demand, and then that the retail price for the PlayStation gaming console was €500. Okay, so we have 2 important points there. 1 for the excess demand, and 2 500. Alright, and it's flagging both these things in the question, which means we need to put these in our answer. And the second part of the question, from your diagram above, explain how excess demand occurs. So it's telling us excess demand occurs. So it wants us to draw a new demand curve in this point, in this diagram, and explain how excess demand happens. So the question is actually telling you what we need. So straight away, we always put in P and Q. Okay, your price and quantity. And we label our supply curve S. That's already there. So again, marks for all these straight away. We're then going to draw a normal demand curve, so downward sloping demand curve from left to right, and label that D. And then we're going to mark in our point of equilibrium, where it meets, so where supply and demand meet, and we will call that QE, for quantity equilibrium, and we'll go across. And I like to do my dotted lines, right? And we call that PE for price equilibrium. Again, the E doesn't matter. You can call it P1, Q1, whatever. Okay, PX, QX. I just like to keep it simple with PE and QE, E for equilibrium. Okay, the next thing we're going to do then is put in our point 2 here, right, which is our €500. So we know that equilibrium occurs where supply and demand meet, and that's PE. Okay, €500 is going to be below that because it's already told us that excess demand has occurred. Alright, so we know that there's extra demand. So pick somewhere below the PE point and bring it across. Okay. So here is our excess demand. Okay, and we can call that whatever, QX. Right, for excess demand. So essentially this block is going to be your excess demand. So from point QE to QX. Alright, and that's your diagram drawn. Second part of the question asks us to explain how excess demand actually occurs. So, explaining it, I suppose you can see that at price 500, we get quantity QX. Okay, so basically what that means is this point here, there is more demand than goods available. So there's more demand. Obviously we've got a fixed supply curve here, so there's more people demanding the good when the price is €500 than there is products available, PlayStations available. So what that basically means is the price charged in this is too low, so excess demand then will put pressure on the price, driving the price back up to equilibrium. So eventually we'll move back up to here. Price will keep going up until we reach the equilibrium point, which brings us across to PE over here. So basically by price keeping going, increasing or keep going up, demand and supply will meet again at the equilibrium point. So excess demand will be eroded because less people will be able to or willing to buy the product after it goes up above the 500 mark up to PE. So the next question we're going to look at is from 2022. It's question 15A, part 3. So you're asked, grant aid of 395 million was provided to Irish farmers to improve and or build a specific range of farm buildings or purchase equipment that may benefit their farm business, for example, milk machines. Explain with the use of a fully labelled diagram below how this grant aid would have impacted on the equilibrium price and quantity of milk. Okay, so we're looking at a grant aid, number one. So we have to decide whether that affects demand or supply, first of all, and then we have to decide whether it's going to cause a shift to the left or shift to the right. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, as always, we label our diagram P and Q, and we label our equilibrium position. So E for equilibrium, and we go straight across. Call it PE for price equilibrium, or again you can do P1, P2, PX, whatever. I always do PE, and then QE for quantity equilibrium. Okay, so why it's important here, I suppose, now is we have to decide what we looked at previously in the video is whether grant aid is supply or demand. Is it one of the factors that causes supply or demand to shift? Okay, and if you have a good grasp of those factors, you should be able to realize that grant aid affects supply. Okay, so grants cause supply to increase as they lower production, they lower the cost of production. Okay, so to make it cheaper for a company to supply goods. So again, we should have labelled our demand curve already and our supply curve already. So now we're going to label this supply curve S1, and I'm going to just change the E to E1. Okay, because we're going to draw a new supply curve now. I'm going to draw that in red. So our supply is going to increase because grants have made it cheaper to supply, so costs of production have become lower. So we draw a new supply curve out here and we call it S2. That gives us a new equilibrium position here. So we're going to call this E2. Okay, and down here, straight down, will give us quantity, QE2, we'll say, and price of PE2. Okay, so that is your fully labelled diagram. Supply has shifted to the right because grant aid of 395 million has made it cheaper to produce that good. So you'd be after stating that, so you'd state that in your explanation then underneath the diagram. So supply is going to shift right, okay, because grant aid has caused a lower cost of production, and then you just state what happens with the new equilibrium position. So you would always go with the explanation saying that the equilibrium price, so it's an equilibrium price has decreased from PE in this sense to PE2, and equilibrium quantity has increased from QE to QE2. Again, that's very shorthand. Obviously, you'd write that in full words. You wouldn't be using arrows, etc. But you get the idea. So you're looking again to kind of explain it in 3 or 4 sentences. Literally what happens. So the grant should help reduce costs and cause it to become more efficient. This causes S1 to shift to S2 to the right. And so what happens then is your equilibrium E1 goes to E2. So what you're saying is equilibrium price decreases from PE down to PE2. And then your equilibrium quantity increases from QE to QE2. Okay, again, as I've said, PE, PE2, whatever you write here is fine. Just make sure you're using the same in your explanation. So if you use P1 and P2, that's absolutely fine too. If you use PA, PB, all okay. Right, just make sure that whatever you write here and here with your QE and QE2, that you reference it the same in your explanation. As I said, use words rather than my shorthand arrows. Okay, but a nice easy question. So again, we have another question from 2022, question 16C this time. It relates to fast fashion, which again has been very topical for the last couple of years. So the fashion industry produces 10% of all humanity's carbon emissions. It's the second largest consumer of the world's water supply and pollutes the oceans. 85% of all textiles go to landfill each year. Research shows that people are buying more clothes now than ever, but are only keeping them for half as long. So explain with the use of a fully labelled diagram how the introduction of minimum pricing above the market equilibrium price on fast fashion will impact on the market for fast fashion. Okay, so straight away we'll go and do our same again. Put in our P, our Q, our equilibrium, and then we'll do our price equilibrium, and we will do our quantity equilibrium. Okay, so then we have to draw in our minimum price, which is, as it tells you in the question, and it's bolded, right, above the market equilibrium price. So we need to draw a new price in here. So pick somewhere fairly high above price equilibrium, so you have a nice bit of space to work with. So I'm going to pick here, all right, and we call that P min. So the minimum price. And you're going to go straight across there, and obviously we draw a ruler. Okay, and that's your new minimum price. Alright, so again, at this stage, we should have labelled our demand curve and our supply curve. Okay, now we need to show the new quantities. Alright, so obviously a price is way higher than equilibrium price. So you're going to mark in where the P min hits the demand curve, and that's going to be your new quantity demanded. So obviously the price has increased, so less people are now demanding it than at the equilibrium price. And as we know from supply, as the price goes up, supply goes up. So because it's a higher price now, more suppliers are willing to supply their good. So that has increased from QE to QS. Right? So then we need to show that this area here is basically our surplus. So let's write that in SUR surplus. Okay, so what that basically means is there is more supply than demand. Okay, so really what you're looking at then in your explanation is you're going to say the effects on price. So through imposing that minimum price on the products, the price is legally forced. So it's by law now because it's a minimum price upwards from PE to P min. Okay, what's the effect on demand? Demand has obviously dropped from QE to QD, quantity demanded. And what's the effect on the market then? It'll result in that surplus that we talked about. So here, this area here. Alright, why? Because supply, there's excess supply now compared to lack of demand. So that's that question completed as well. Okay, so this next question is actually from the old course from 2019, but I put it in because it's quite relevant and it's good practice. Still the same types of questions are coming up again, and part C is relevant enough at the minute in terms of rank controls, so I think it's well worth having a look at. So for this question, you're asked to assume the market for a brand of Irish crisps is in equilibrium. Explain with the aid of a separate diagram in each case the effects which each of the following is most likely to have on the initial equilibrium position of this market. Okay, so you'll see the fact that it was in the old course, it gave you the marks, it was 30 marks going for this, which meant it was 10 marks each. So what you had to decide again here, this is why I put our notes at the start of the video, you really have to know the factors that affect demand and the factors that affect supply, because these are the style of questions that you're being asked. Even though it's the old course, they're still asking similar types of question. So for part 1 there, the lack of rainfall in 2018 creates a drought which reduces potato crops. You have to decide, is that supply or demand, and will it shift left or right? Second one, vegan consumers stage protests against animal delivered flavouring on crisps. And the third one is crisp companies receive a subsidy from the government. Okay, so if we look at the first one, alright, the lack of rainfall in 2018 creates a drought which reduces potato crops. Okay, so that's an unplanned factor. Alright, it's a drought, so it's going to affect supply. Okay, and supply is going to shift left because it decreases. Second one, vegan consumers stage protests against animal-derived flavouring on crisps. So that is demand. And it's a change in consumer taste, basically. So it's that point that affects demand, and that is going to cause demand to shift left because less people are going to buy it due to that protest. And the third one then, crisp companies receive a subsidy from the government. So again, that is subsidy, so that is supply. And subsidy makes it cheaper to produce goods, so that means supply is going to shift right. Okay. So there is the diagram drawn. So you are showing that supply is shifting left, right, which gives us a new equilibrium position. So we had equilibrium 1 and we've got equilibrium 2. Okay, so the lack of rainfall reduces the potato crop, which is raw material used in the production of crisps. So there's 4 statements. This causes the supply curve to shift to the left from S1 to S2. And then you say the price and quantity will happen to it. The price will rise from P1 to P2. The quantity will fall from Q1 to Q2. So 5 marks for the diagram, 5 for the explanation. So something similar, similar style question can and will come up in the new course. So the second one then was the protest, and the protest against the product will create negative publicity for the product, reducing its popularity with consumers. So again, demand in this situation is shifting left, so demand is decreasing. So our equilibrium position here has dropped to here. So E1 has gone to E2. So again, step by step, explain it. This causes the demand curve for crisps to shift left from D1 to D2. Price will fall from P1 to P2 and quantity will decrease from Q1 to Q2. Right, as you can see by the arrows. Always worth drawing in the arrows and labeling as well. Even though it's not an American scheme there, I would always label your equilibrium position on both diagrams. On both curves, E1 and E2. Alright, sometimes you'll see that on diagrams, they will have it on it. And then if you don't have it, you lose marks. So always better to cover all eventualities. Right, you're not going to lose marks for labeling it, so definitely worth doing. The last one then is the subsidy. So the subsidy is payment from the government to encourage the production of the good. So quick explanation of what it is. This payment will cause the supply curve to shift to the right from S1 to S2. Again, let's draw in our equilibrium positions, E1 and E2. So we can see that supply has shifted right. So supply is going to increase. This caused the price to decrease from P1 to P2 and the quantity will increase from Q1 to Q2. So again, you're just literally explaining what's going on in the graph or in the diagram. Very, very straightforward question, but again, if you do not know the factors that affect demand and the factors that affect supply, this question will be very, very difficult for you, and it's easy marks if it comes up if you know those. So that's a minimum. Make sure you learn off the factors that affect demand and the factors that affect supply and be able to do these questions to practice these. And obviously that's, as we've mentioned earlier, is already at the start of the video, so really worth looking over that and making sure you absolutely know it in detail. So this is part C of that question from 2019. And again, it's related to rent. Obviously, we know the housing crisis is still very, very topical. It hasn't changed since that time. So it states that the latest figures from the RTB show rents continue to trend upwards, with average national rent increasing to €1,122 in quarter 3 of 2018, an increase of €78 since quarter 3 2017. So the diagram above illustrates government intervention in the form of a rent control or price ceiling. And this is something that's bandied about a few times in recent budgets or discussed in recent budgets. Hasn't actually come in, but it's always talked about. So it's something that could easily be asked again this year or something like it. So the first point or the first question you're asked here is explain the impact of the implementation of the rent control with reference to the diagram above. The second point then asks you outline the possible economic consequences on the Irish rental property market of this government intervention. So if we look at the diagram, alright, PE is obviously price equilibrium. So where supply and demand meet. But because this P max has been introduced, the price ceiling, rent can no longer go any higher than this point. Okay, so what happens there is you've essentially got a lower price of rent. So obviously that is going to create more demand. So if we look at our new demand here, right, so where the P max hits the demand point, that's leaving you with 600,000 for demand. Okay, but what we get obviously from a supplier's point of view, the PMAX, the rent control, the price ceiling, is not very good. So less suppliers or less landlords are willing to supply their accommodation. Now, so that has dropped from 400 to 200. Okay, so what you've got is a situation, you've got only 200,000 people willing to supply their accommodation, whereas you've 600,000 people demanding it. So what you get is this excess demand. Okay, because essentially rent has become cheaper, more people are looking for it, but less landlords are willing to supply it because it's not worth their while. So this is the explanation of the market scheme. The price has been restricted to or set at level P max. So the price level falls from the equilibrium level of PE to the new P max. That drop. So the quantity supplied decreases from 400,000 to 200,000. The quantity demanded increases from 400 to 600. Okay. So again, what are you left with? This area of excess demand. So it creates excess demand or shortage of 400,000. Easy. Okay. So again, I put it in because I was just thinking it is still topical. It's worth revising. It's relatively new, 2019, so it's one of the last old course questions to come in, so well worth revising. So the second part of the question then asked you to outline the possible economic consequences on the Irish rental property market of this government intervention. Okay, so obviously, first and foremost, it's going to be good for consumers because it's going to increase their standard of living. Okay, because they're obviously going to have more disposable income. So consumers who manage to get a property to rent at this new reduced rate now have surplus income, which can be used on other goods and services, thereby improving their standard of living. So essentially, there's less exploitation. We've seen on the diagram that excess demand is created. The quantity demand of properties will increase as it's much more affordable for consumers. However, as landlords won't be receiving as much income from renting, quantity supplied will decrease, leading to excess demand, i.e. a shortage of properties to rent. So you could get similar to basically what we have now, right? Increased homelessness and the need for government to provide accommodation. Alright, so this is all the way back 2018, 2019. These questions are based on, and nothing has changed really. We are still in a situation of excess demand, so well worth looking at these questions. You get a decrease in the number of landlords, right? So as landlords that earn reduced income from renting out their properties, they'll be less inclined to do so, meaning there'll be a reduction in available properties to rent. You might get this improved quality of accommodation. Okay, so as landlords again earn that reduced income, they're less inclined to invest in the upkeep of their properties in order to reduce their costs. You could get an increase in black market activity. More properties may be illegally rented or to tenants in the black market and not declared for tax purposes. And the last one, you could get increased utility costs. So landlords may try to circumvent the new regulations by increasing the charges increasing the prices they're charging for goods related to the property, such as charging tenants for use of parking space, electricity, things like that. So still topical, as I said, so well worth looking at this style of question for this year's exam again. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our Saturday session today on market equilibrium. We got through quite a bit. Hopefully you found it useful and hopefully you got something out of it. We have looked at the concepts of demand and supply and how they interact and interlink to give us our market equilibrium position. We have graphically represented all the curves, so demand, supply and the market equilibrium curves. We have looked at the factors that affect both demand and supply. We've looked at the factors that affect a movement or that cause a movement along both the demand and supply curve, and then the shift. So the factors other than price which can cause a shift of the demand or supply curve. And we've graphically represented those. And we have looked at all those factors together to practice some of the exam questions, the most recent exam questions that have come up. So hopefully, as I said, you found that really beneficial and useful. Again, as I said at the start of the video, at the start of the session, that this is pretty much a guaranteed question in some shape or form. Alright, I've yet to see an economics paper in all my years that doesn't have some bit of demand or supply or them merged together for an equilibrium question. So again, vital that you keep revising these topics and make sure you become absolutely familiar with them, that they become second nature to you for the exam in June. Keep an eye out on any other videos, keep an eye out on our social media channels for updates on videos that will be coming added to the sites, and any new Saturday sessions we are going to have, and also revision sessions throughout the midterms over the rest of the year. Okay, so best of luck guys, and thanks for listening again today.